Somewhere beneath a quiet hill in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists found a layer of scorched earth, scattered human remains, and hundreds of sling stones. Evidence of a siege that happened roughly 3,200 years ago. For over a century, people have asked the same question. Is this the city Homer wrote about? Is this Troy? To understand what might have happened at that hill, you have to go back to a wedding no one was supposed to remember, because of who wasn't invited. Every god on Mount Olympus received an invitation except one, Eris, the goddess of discord. She wasn't the kind of guest anyone wanted around, so she was left off the list. She came anyway, uninvited, and rolled a golden apple across the floor with a single word carved into it, "To the fairest." 3 goddesses reached for it at once. Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; Aphrodite, goddess of love. None of them were willing to let the others have it, and the argument escalated all the way to Zeus himself. Zeus, wisely, refused to touch the decision. He sent the 3 of them to a mountain outside a city called Troy to let a mortal shepherd settle what the king of the gods wouldn't. That shepherd was actually a Trojan prince named Paris, raised outside the city and unaware of his own royal blood. Each goddess offered him a bribe disguised as a gift: power from Hera, wisdom and victory in every battle from Athena, and from Aphrodite, the love of the most beautiful woman alive. Paris chose the woman. It seemed like the easiest gift to understand. It would turn out to be the most expensive decision in the ancient world. The woman was Helen, queen of Sparta, already married to a king named Menelaus. Years earlier, before that marriage, dozens of Greek rulers had competed for her hand, and to prevent bloodshed among the losers, they'd all sworn an oath. Whoever won Helen, the rest would defend his marriage if anyone ever tried to take her. That oath sat forgotten for years. Then Paris sailed to Sparta as a guest in Menelaus's own house and left with his host's wife. Whether Helen went by choice or was taken against her will, the ancient accounts don't agree. What they do agree on is what happened next. Menelaus called in the oath. His brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, rallied every ruler who'd sworn it. A fleet of well over 1,000 ships gathered at a harbor called Aulis, ready to sail for Troy. Then the winds stopped. For days, the entire invasion sat motionless, and the Greeks learned why. The goddess Artemis was furious with Agamemnon over an unrelated offense, and she wanted a price paid before she'd let the winds return. His own daughter, Iphigenia. Agamemnon lured her to the camp under the pretense of a wedding to Achilles. Instead, she was led to an altar. Different traditions tell what happened differently. In one, she doesn't survive. In another, Artemis pulls her away at the last moment and leaves an animal in her place. Either way, the winds returned, and the fleet sailed. But Agamemnon's wife, back home, never let it go. Remember her. She matters later. There was one more piece the Greeks needed before they could leave. A warrior named Achilles, son of a sea goddess, who a prophecy said Troy could never fall without. His mother, knowing he was fated to die if he went to war, hid him among a king's daughters disguised as a girl. It was Odysseus, the cleverest man in the Greek camp, who found him by laying out jewelry and fine cloth alongside a single sword and sounding a trumpet blast as if the island were under attack. Every girl in the room fled. One reached for the sword instead. Achilles chose to go to war knowing it might cost him everything, because the alternative was a long life nobody would remember. The siege that followed lasted nearly a decade, and for most of that time, neither side could finish it. Troy's walls were said to be built by the gods themselves, and no army could break through them by force. The Greeks had the era's greatest fighters: Achilles, Odysseus, the towering warrior Ajax. Troy had Hector, the one Trojan capable of standing against nearly anyone the Greeks sent at him. Everyone except Achilles. For 9 years, that stalemate held. Then, in the 10th year, it collapsed. Not because of anything the Trojans did, but because of a quarrel inside the Greek camp itself. Agamemnon had taken a war prize from Achilles to save face after being forced to return a captive to her father, a priest whose god had answered with a plague on the Greek army. Achilles, humiliated, refused to fight another day of the war. He asked his mother to convince the gods to let the Trojans win, just badly enough that the Greeks would understand what they'd lost without him. It worked far better than he expected. Hector drove the Greeks all the way back to their own ships, and the camp nearly fell. Achilles' closest companion, Patroclus, couldn't stand by any longer. He asked to wear Achilles' armor into battle, just to make the Trojans believe their greatest enemy had returned. Achilles agreed on one condition: push them back, but don't chase them to the walls. Patroclus didn't listen. He drove the Trojans all the way to the gates of Troy, and there Hector confronted him, and he lost his life on the field, his armor taken as a trophy. What followed was one of the most famous acts of grief in the ancient world. Achilles returned to the fight with a single purpose. He chased Hector 3 full circuits around the walls of Troy before the two finally met, and Hector did not survive the encounter. For 12 days, Achilles dragged his rival's body around the tomb of Patroclus, refusing to let it rest until, one night, an old man walked alone into the Greek camp. It was Priam, Hector's father, the king of Troy itself, guided in secret to kneel before the man who had ended his son's life and beg for the body back. He asked Achilles to think of his own father, waiting at home, growing old without him. Achilles wept and returned the body. Homer's account of the war ends there, not with a Greek victory, but with a funeral. But the war didn't end. The final chapter survives only in fragments and summaries of poems that no longer exist in full, and it cost the Greeks almost as much as the previous 9 years combined. Achilles went on to face and defeat a warrior queen and a foreign king who came to Troy's aid before Paris, guided by the god Apollo, struck him with an arrow. The greatest fighter in the Greek army did not survive the war either. What followed was a bitter dispute over who deserved his armor, a dispute so damaging that when it wasn't awarded to the man who believed he'd earned it, that warrior turned on himself in shame and did not survive the night. 2 of the Greeks' best fighters gone, without Troy's walls ever falling by force. It was a captured Trojan prophet who finally revealed what the Greeks still needed: a sacred bow belonging to a legendary hero's bloodline and a hidden image of Athena inside the city itself. Once both were secured, the man who started the war with a single choice years earlier was finally struck down using a weapon from a hero the Greeks had once cast aside, and still the walls stood. So Odysseus proposed something no siege tactic had managed in 10 years. Build a massive wooden horse, hide soldiers inside it, leave it at the gates, and sail away as if the war were over. The Trojans found it the next morning, along with a single Greek soldier who'd allowed himself to be captured, and told them the horse was sacred, that bringing it inside the walls would protect the city forever. Not everyone believed it. A priest named Laocoon hurled a spear into its side in warning, and moments later, according to the story, 2 serpents rose from the sea and ended him and his sons in front of the entire city. After that, no one else objected. Even Cassandra, the king's own daughter, cursed to always tell the truth and never be believed, screamed that the horse would burn the city down. She was right, and it changed nothing. That night, while Troy celebrated what it believed was the end of the war, the soldiers, hidden inside the horse, climbed out and opened the gates from within. The fleet that had never actually left returned under cover of darkness, and Troy, one of the wealthiest cities of the entire Bronze Age, did not survive the night. The city's king was struck down at his own altar. An infant prince was thrown from the walls so he could never grow up to seek revenge. The women of the royal family were divided among the victors as captives, and one act of violence against a priestess inside a temple was so severe that the goddess who had backed the Greeks for 10 straight years turned against them completely. Winning the war, it turned out, was the easy part. Getting home was where the real reckoning began. Storms scattered the Greek fleet. One warrior who boasted that he'd survived the sea without the gods' help was pulled back under the water and did not survive a second time. And Agamemnon, the commander who had launched over 1,000 ships and sacrificed his own daughter to do it, sailed home to a wife who had spent 10 years waiting and had never forgiven him. She was ready for him. He did not survive his first night home. On the Trojan side, one man escaped the burning city, carrying his elderly father on his back, a prince named Aeneas. Centuries later, a Roman poet would claim that same refugee eventually reached Italy and became the ancestor of Rome itself. The greatest empire the ancient world would ever produce traced its own origin back to a survivor fleeing the fire. Which brings us back to that hill in modern Turkey. In the 1870s, a German archaeologist became convinced he'd found the real city behind the myth, and what he uncovered was 9 layers of settlement stacked on top of one another across thousands of years. One layer in particular stands out, destroyed by fire around 1180 BC, with scattered remains and stockpiles of sling stones consistent with a siege. Around the same time, records from a neighboring Bronze Age empire mention a kingdom called Wilusa and a rival power across the sea called Ahiyawa, names that sound remarkably close to Homer's Ilios and his Achaeans. Did the war unfold exactly the way the poets described it, gods and prophecies included? Almost certainly not. But something happened at that city roughly 3,200 years ago. Something violent enough and significant enough that people never stopped telling the story. And it all traces back, according to the myth, to one goddess who wasn't invited to a wedding.